Hey guys, this is Matt again, and welcome again to my home. We're in the series called Fixer Upper, and all series long we've been at my house, not because we're doing like projects around my house, but because we're talking about how do we renovate our lives, how do we build strong families. And so again, just welcome back to my house. And I don't know if you've seen the show like Fixer Upper before, but on the show they always have kind of the big reveal at the end. They have a big picture of the old house kind of blocking the view of the new house, and they pull it apart, and you get to see this new home, and it's incredible and it's beautiful and it's all renovated. And throughout this series, we've been giving you some tools and a blueprint in order to bring some restoration to your life and to your family, because we want to build a foundation for our lives and our families to have our best life now and down the road. And we want you to experience that before and that after, just like that reveal. And we hope that you can take steps with your family and you get some tools to build a strong family. And so we've been talking about how we can do that. We looked at week one, we talked about building a foundation. We don't want to just kind of go through life randomly and just react to life. We want to build on a foundation. Sometimes we can end up building in different directions as a family. We can end up building because like our career makes us build one way and our activities build another way, and then we can end up obeying our kids instead of kids obeying our parents, and we end up building that way, and there's all these different ways we end up building, but we got to build on a foundation. And we talked about how God's foundation is about being an imitator of Him and living this life of love and building this framework of love for our families and building upon Him as our foundation. In week two, we talked about building together as one. And what that means is we looked at in Ephesians 5, we talked about husband and wife need to be one. They need to be in it together in every aspect. And as a family, we want to build as one. That means giving to each other, being selfless. If you look at the blueprint for relationships in Ephesians, it's all about this mutual sacrifice and submission and respect. And so we want to build together as one, being selfless, but also being on the same page as one. And we talked about how that means we got to communicate it, not only in what we say, but what we do. And we want to model that for each other as we go out throughout our life. So today we're going to be continuing our series about building strong families, and I got some tools here with me, and maybe you know what these tools are, maybe you don't. These are pretty simple tools. Tools can get more complex. You can get like a router, and with all these tools, you need to be able to learn how to use them and use them for the right purposes, use them in the right way so you build properly. Like you're going to use this to measure, to mark measurements. You're not going to actually try to cut something with this. It's plastic and it's not made for that. You got to use the tools in the right way. And so as we're learning how to build the foundation and build together as one, we're going to be talking more about how do we actually build each other up with the tools that we've been learning today. I have some blueprints here for our new building, and the blueprints are great because it shows kind of where to build, and it gives you the measurements, and it gives you all the specs in order to build in the right way. Now, wouldn't it be great to have blueprints for our lives, how to renovate them and how to build up our families? And we've been talking about we actually have that, and we've been looking at some of God's blueprints for building strong families in Ephesians 5 and 6. And so we're going to look at another verse today as we continue to look at his blueprint on how to build strong families. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, it says this: "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in training and instruction of the Lord." So that verse says, fathers, don't exasperate your kids. And what we're talking about today is that with that verse, we're talking about how do we build each other up and not tear each other down. Because the reality of life is that as parents, there's a lot of things we need to do with our kids. We need to discipline or course correct or help them navigate different challenges. There are moments when maybe our kids annoy us, or we annoy our spouse, or we might even annoy ourselves. There's times when our kids are even annoyed with us as parents, and there's spots when we have to navigate challenges and communication, and none of that is easy. So how do we do it in a way where we don't exasperate, where we build up and not tear down? Because the reality is maybe you find yourself in situations like this. You're in the car and you're driving, and your kids are in the back, and you say, hey, you need to be quiet, you're distracting me, and they keep goofing off, and you say, you need to be quiet, and they keep goofing off, and then you're like yelling, you need to be quiet, and you're yelling really loud and being loud, telling them not to be loud, and that's kind of a weird thing. I know I found myself there before. Maybe you found yourself in this situation of using sarcasm when you're in like an argument with your wife, and I've done that before. That doesn't go over well, and that doesn't communicate well. And it sometimes tears down instead of builds up. Or maybe you're in a situation where like your kid comes home from school and they say their teacher was mean to them, and there's this kind of instinct as a parent that sets in where you need to protect your kid, and you follow up with a teacher and you tell them not to be mean to your kid, but it turns out they were just being disruptive in class and had to move to a different chair or whatever it might be. But there's this kind of natural reaction that sets in as parents to protect our kids. Or maybe your kid was disappointed because they didn't make the team, or they didn't make the show, or whatever it might be, and maybe we try to encourage them and tell them how great they really are, and maybe their coach or whatever doesn't know what they're doing, and it builds kind of this kind of false hope because they probably weren't good enough to make the team. In our eyes, we think they're the best as parents, but in reality, they might not be. So, like, how do we navigate all those situations in order to build each other up and not exasperate or tear down? I think we have to remember that verse from Proverbs 22:6. It says, "Train up your children in the way they should go, and when they grow old, they won't turn from it." We have to remember that we need to help prepare them to leave and succeed, and that should help us to begin to understand how to differentiate between building up and tearing down. The other day I got something in the mail, and it came all wrapped in this package full of bubble wrap. You gotta love bubble wrap, right? You know, the bubble wrap's in there to protect, to make sure it doesn't break. And, you know, sometimes as a parent or in any kind of relationship, we almost want to wrap our kids up or that other person up with the bubble wrap to make sure nothing bad happens to our kids. Like, we don't want anything bad to happen to them, and it's like great intentions, and we try to wrap them in bubble wrap. And, you know, as a parent, there's all these fears that we face, the fear of them missing out or not measuring up or getting bullied, and we just want to get that bubble wrap out and wrap them all up tight in it. But we got to remember our goal. That goal from Proverbs 22 is to train up our kids in the way they should go so that when they grow old, they won't turn from it. Now, that doesn't mean we exasperate our kids like we talked about in Ephesians 6, but that doesn't mean we wrap them up in bubble wrap either. We don't want to be like the American Idol parent who tells their kid they're a great singer even though they're horrible, and then they kind of make a fool of themselves down the road. Like they talk about some kids nowadays like snowflakes where they melt under any kind of pressure. Like, we don't want to be the American Idol parent, but we also don't want to be the parent who exasperates our kid and is always mean or pushing them or all about just the rules or is just this tough love all the time. We got to find somewhere in between the bubble wrap American Idol parent and that harsh parent, the exasperator parent. Where is that middle ground? How do we find that? I think the key is in the second part of Ephesians 6:4 when it talks about instructing them in the Lord and His ways. We've been talking about this verse from Proverbs throughout the series, training up your child in the way they should go, so when they grow old, they won't turn from it. It's this idea of that our kids need to eventually leave, and we want them to succeed. That's the goal as a parent, and that's also the goal for our families, is to build our families and our relationships in such a way that we'll have this great foundation for the future ahead. And so as we're thinking about that and trying to navigate, how do I bring in course correction? How do I deal with conflict? Like, we want to do these in such a way where we're not being the American Idol, the bubble wrap parent, but we don't want to be too harsh like the exasperating parent. Like, we got to find a way where everyone can learn how to communicate, how to handle conflict, how to deal with consequences, and how to move forward in such a way where we can support each other, but build each other up at the same time. That means we want to bring some encouragement and some things like that, but it's not bringing false hope or encouragement like telling your kid who's a bad singer that they're a great singer. It's about being encouraging and being supportive and building each other up, but it has to all be about the foundation. See, our foundation is God, and living this life of love and being an imitator of Him. It's finding our identity and who He says we are and being accepted by Him and His family no matter who we are, what we've done. See, it's building upon that foundation. So as we deal with conflict, as we deal with consequences, as we're helping our kids deal with it, as we're kind of navigating that as maybe individuals or couples, it really comes back to that second part of Ephesians 6:4. It said, "Fathers, don't exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord." See, it has to tie back to that foundation. We have these tools, and we said we got to learn to use them the right way. And if we're going to build each other up and prepare each other for down the road to leave and succeed, or to build a foundation that will last for our families, we got to use these tools in the right way. And it's designed not just to give false encouragement, but to help us figure out who we are in our relationship with God and what it means to follow Him. It's building upon that foundation. It's like in a relationship with your spouse, it's navigating any kind of conflict in such a way where we're building each other up, not tearing each other down. It's thinking through, what can I do to help my spouse know more of God and understand more of Him? It's thinking with your kids as they're dealing with consequences, or as they're dealing with maybe challenges. It's like, how can I help them understand that we're designed to live a life of love and to build our lives in this foundation of God? And maybe when we face maybe our own mistakes, it's understanding that God accepts us and loves us no matter when we fail, but He wants us to kind of move forward in this relationship with Him. And He still loves and accepts us. It's having that understanding, but it's all tied back to that foundation. See, when we tie back to that foundation, whether it's dealing with our spouse or our kids or our grandkids or our adult kids, or maybe even as we're looking for our family in the future if we're single, if it's always tied back to that foundation, that's when we renovate our lives, when we build it up. That was what gives our family strength, because it's built upon a foundation and we're building each other up on that foundation. So that's my question for you. What are you doing to help each other see God? Whether it's in any relationships you have, maybe it's with your spouse, your kids, your grandkids, your adult kids. What are you doing to help them see God, maybe through the way you live, like we talked about last week, but also what are you doing to help them navigate life and challenges and consequences in such a way that they see God through those things? That's what it means to build each other up, to not exasperate, but to encourage in such a way that we instruct each other in the ways of God, and it's built upon His foundation. See, the whole point of building each other up isn't about this kind of false hope of like, hey, you're great and you're perfect, or you're the best, because deep down inside we all know we're not the best and we're not always good. And so that's like false hope. How we really build each other up is about developing this relationship with God, about finding our identity in Him, about instructing in His ways, tying it back to the foundation. If we can learn to communicate, to handle conflict, to help our kids deal with consequences or hard issues in such a way that ties back to the foundation, that develops their own foundation in God. That develops their own identity in God. That's when they begin to experience their best life, because it's all tied back to that foundation. It's about instructing them in God and His ways and building upon the foundation, not just building each other up with false hope, but building each other up and finding our identity and our life in this relationship with God. I saw this video with Chip and Joe from Fixer Upper, and there was a video about how they are so different in their marriage. Like, Chip is kind of wild and carefree, and Joe is kind of structured and organized. But they talked about how, as they learn to communicate and deal with those differences in their relationship, how it actually helped them develop their relationship with God. As they build each other up, it was also building each other up in their relationship with God. And I think that is the key on how we exactly use the tools in order to build a strong family. Check out this video.